Welcome into the Sunday side session. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by this week's special guest. Couldn't wait to discuss Nebraska, Indiana. Agreed to this when he thought that Nebraska might be able to make it a game and has gallantly chosen to show up even though the Huskers lost 56-7. Josh Peterson from 1620 The Zone. An unsportsmanlike conduct. Josh, how we doing?
Schaefer, good morning. I am good. How are you?
I'm fine. I got to experience a just soul crushing baseball loss on Friday. Followed it up with an 11 a.m. kick in a game in which, even if Nebraska loses, if they just show up and play adequately well, you can at least acknowledge you lost to a team on the road that was ranked, that is better than you expected, all of those things. Instead, they just didn't show up at all. And then to top it off, I got to watch the same baseball team with maybe an even more soul-crushing loss on Saturday because they were up 2-0 this time and seemed to have been cruising and ran into the same issues with the same team that has eliminated them for the fourth time in the last 8 years. So congratulations to any New York Yankees fans listening. I hope you have a wonderful fall classic. I will not be watching because it's going to be the Dodgers, and nobody wants to watch that. And you're probably going to get swept because you're not that good, and the Dodgers are ridiculously good, and Cleveland's not good at all. And that's enough about baseball. All right. People want to hear about football. That's why they have listened to this podcast. They want to hear about 56-7 Indiana.
Yeah.
Look, you listened to the post-game pod I had with Michael Bruntz. I know you listened because you tweeted about it. What is your favorite description when a team gets their ass kicked? Apparently Bruntz is just murder. I would love to know. This is the question I want to know from people this week.
Yeah, that was a good one. It caught me off guard. I laughed very hard. Eviscerate kind of seems like a solid word.
Yeah, that's one out there.
The thing about this one now is it sat with me for almost 24 hours is just how methodical Indiana made it look, where it wasn't like, I made the comparison. Yeah, a lot of people have made the comparison to the 62-3 game from 2016 versus Ohio State, but that seemed like one of those traditional, butt whoopings. This, I don't know, man. It was just like, wow, every time they get the ball, they go down the field. Nebraska had a couple of drives early where, one of them ends with a fumble on fourth down. They obviously get the touchdown. They're moving the ball, but they're just never able to answer. And then Indiana gets it, and they just go right back down the field. And the ease in which their offense moved on the defense is just something that I know I will be using in my prognostication for any of the 5 games moving forward the rest of the year.
Yeah, and we will dive into that because I have thoughts. There was more football played after Nebraska's loss yesterday. The Big Ten is wild right now. Nebraska's remaining schedule makes no sense. It really doesn't. But we'll get into all of that. I want to return to something that you kind of had said in there, in particular with just the way that it looked in the game that it reminded you of. You said 62-3. The Ohio State game I thought of was the Nebraska College game day game, where you could tell from probably midway through the first quarter on, they were better. They were a lot better. And good Lord, were they more athletic, faster, more well-coached. Every possible well or more was the other team. And that's what Indiana looked like. And it's wild because, again, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've watched a lot of Indiana football. I had them on, in snippets throughout the season, looked over stuff. Nebraska made them look as good as they have all year. And I don't know what you want to take away from that exactly. But again, the last time I felt like I saw that from the opposing team was the Ohio State game in 2019 in Lincoln, where they were just that much better, which is wild because in theory, Nebraska plays a really, really, really good Ohio State team next week.
Yep, exactly. It's a really good comparison because I remember that game, Ohio State goes right down the field. Nebraska has a kickoff return that they try to return. They get a holding penalty. They're suddenly backed up. They turn the ball over. Ohio State's up 14-0, and Nebraska gets the ball back, and there is that drive, and that was the drive where they ran the option a lot. And that drive, I remember being there in the stadium thinking, they have to score or this game is over. Now, the game was already over, but it was like they have to do this. And I had a similar feeling yesterday watching the game when Indiana, they score on their first drive. Nebraska, the special teams, the kick return, and suddenly they're at their own 2. They go 6 plays, and then they punt. Then they stop Indiana, and then they get the ball back. And I didn't think in that next drive when they fumbled on 4th down that was a must-score drive. I thought that when they finally scored and Indiana got the ball back, I was watching with a buddy, and I said, they have to stop them here or this game is over. And, like, dude, I watch football every week. Do other fans feel that way early in a game where they're like, if this team scores to make it 21-7, the football game is over? Maybe that's just PTSD from watching this program over the last 20 years. But I thought that in the moment. And once Indiana scored, I thought the game was over. I did not think that Nebraska was going to have a chance. That seemed like such an important moment of, if you can get a stop, you get the ball, you're going to get the ball first in the second half. Like, you can imagine all sorts of scores, because to that point, Nebraska had moved the ball down the field. They had the 10-play, 53-yard drive that ended with the fumble, the 13-play, 75-yard drive. Even though it was difficult, and even though every yard seemed like it was the hardest thing to get, at least they were moving the ball. But once they go down 21-7, I thought the dam opened up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about there is something we really haven't had to see a lot of. Nebraska hasn't had to play from multiple scores behind for really almost any game since Michigan blew them out at home.
Correct.
More than a year ago. And so part of it was they just don't look capable of being able to play from behind. Like, I think they're very much a team that has to play in a specific game flow. I don't think that they're a great team when they're up by a lot. And I don't think they're a great team when they're down by a lot. And so they kind of have to be in that trading punches mode. And once Indiana scored and that offense just didn't do anything yet again, you knew that it was, I mean, they barely were able to get the punt off for that. So, I mean, it was just a disaster all the way around in the first half. It didn't get any better in the second half. Let's just go right into specific parts of this game. We had an exchange, and normally, I famously do not like talking about our texts when we're discussing things in a recorded medium. But we were texting during the game, and you were pretty adamant that the thing about the offense that you're most fed up with is that there's not any real pre-snap movement. So I would like to give you the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah. So I, for those who don't know, and if you're watching right now, you can see it because I'm wearing a Super Bowl sweatshirt from the early 90s. I am
a hat.
Yeah, and a Cowboys hat, even though they're not even playing today, thankfully. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I watch.
That's incredible. You're just like, you're all decked out, and
I love football.
Meanwhile, Minnesota has the biggest game of their season, and I've got a Roman Steakhouse hat on.
Classic. I'm a Cowboys fan. I watch them every week, very, very sadly. They do not have any pre-snap motion. They don't dress up formations, and so everything is static. Now, I use this caveat all the time. I am not like some X's and O's genius. I like to think that I try to educate myself as well as I possibly can. I read a lot. I read a lot of people that cover football, and one of the things that is often talked about is pre-snap motion and dressing things up and forcing the defense to see one thing and then it changes. You're not just moving guys from the left side to the right side just to do it. You're not like, hey, let's get him on this corner. No, it's let's make the defense think. And so when Nebraska lines up in a static formation over and over and over, and for the most part, Schaefer, it was shotgun, a back, and then the two receivers one way, two receivers the other way. And that's what it was pretty much the entire game, or two one way, one the other, and then the tight end. And that's what it was over and over and over. And there's no movement. And look, why is the 49ers offense good? Why is the Vikings offense good? Yes, it's because they have Deebo Samuel or Justin Jefferson, but they're also moving guys around. The Cowboys offense of 2024 has not had a whole lot of pre-snap motion, and it makes it really, really difficult. It forces, I swear, man, I watch the same teams on Saturdays and Sundays. It forces Dylan Raiola to make tight window throws. It forces him to make these contested throws, just like Dak Prescott has to do. And eventually, over the course of 60 minutes, it is going to result in a game like Dylan Raiola had yesterday, where he throws a few interceptions because it's so difficult. I think that the receivers, they haven't helped him out a whole lot. I don't think Dylan's honestly played very good football the last month. And I wonder if I just needed yesterday to kind of fully quantify that in my brain. But I think you watch a good NFL team today and just like watch the number of times they move before the snap. And then rewatch, or don't, but think back to yesterday's game versus Indiana. I think you'll notice, like, okay, that's interesting. And then find an X's and O's person in your life and ask him to tell you about it and why it makes it so difficult for the offense.
Well, I love that you're encouraging people to rewatch Nebraska, Indiana. So
Gross.
I want to start with that. It is interesting because we've seen at times that they put guys in motion. They did it. I don't want to say they did it a lot against Rutgers, but what's sort of darkly comical about it is the times I remember them doing it, Dylan didn't choose the easy throws. Like you had the Ja'Cory Barney play, you had the Janiran Bonner play. They were clearly running guys across the back of the formation to try to open up a quick throw into the flats. And then for whatever reason, those throws weren't there. I looked at yesterday, and there's so many different areas where Nebraska was deficient. It was a total team collapse. So I think you have to start with that. Every aspect of that game was terrible. They were outplayed, outcoached, outclassed, whatever you want to say. It's all there. It's all accurate. The part of it that is really kind of concerning is how bad Nebraska's wide receivers were at sort of everything yesterday. Yep. Like that was, if you're going to pick a position group, and there's a lot of them, and they all played poorly, none of them played well. But if you were going to pick one and be like, man, is that like a harbinger for future struggles? They couldn't block. They couldn't catch. They couldn't get open. It shouldn't be that hard. Nebraska made every single thing about offense look so hard yesterday. And it starts with the fact that their wide receivers were just completely non-existent. I mean, Indiana, here's the thing. Indiana didn't do anything that different than what Nebraska's seen. And Indiana didn't do anything that different than what they put on film. It's not like they dialed up exotic blitzes. It's not like they really had Dylan out of sorts. They ran quarters coverage. And they basically said your outside wide receivers can't beat our corners. And then they didn't. And repeatedly weren't getting open, weren't put in spots to get open. And then Nebraska just goes to the heavy screen game because they can't run the football. So they're trying to simulate the run game with their screen passing game, which sounds great in theory, except Indiana's like, well, we don't have to respect anything over the top. So we're just going to sit on top of you and you can't block. So it doesn't even matter if you hit this guy in rhythm and it looks like he has 5 yards in front of him because we're going to make a tackle in the initial contact. Like it was atrocious yesterday. I mean, the play calling wasn't great. The execution was significantly worse than everything else. And yet the concern is like, what happened to the excitement and the fervor and the enthusiasm of this wide receiver room? Like it shouldn't look this hard. What happened to the throws that were downfield? What happened to guys being able to make plays? I mean, none of that was on display from the wide receivers.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the book is out on the offense, right, in terms of how to defend it. And I think that the receivers have been trending in this direction. What's the last good game that you think that they played? I guess Illinois, probably.
Illinois, they had a very good game.
Yeah, like we
and then from that point forward, and this happened last year. Nebraska played Purdue, and then everyone had the general idea of like, okay, this is how we want to match up. Now that Purdue game, Nebraska didn't get some yardage in there because they just kept holding and pass interfering and everything.
Yep.
So you could argue maybe it's more the Rutgers, but all Rutgers and Indiana have really done just played quarters coverage, and Nebraska's not able to do anything with that.
Yep.
And they had weeks to prepare, and they looked like absolutely terrible on offense. And so I guess the question is, can they? And good luck this week against Ohio State. But going forward, do you have to dramatically shift your offense? Do you have to find, these are questions that you can't answer, I can't answer. we'll see what Marcus Satterfield says on Tuesday when he talks, and we'll see what Matt Rule says on Monday after looking at the film. But is it time to get Malachi Coleman in there more? Is it time? Like, do you have to shake things up? Do you have to do things differently at wide receiver because your veterans and Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair got taken completely out of the game by Indiana?
Yeah, and you said what you did about what they were suddenly relegated into, and that was these short passes. And again, like it's so simplistic, but look at the ease in which Indiana was able to move the ball versus look at how difficult it was for Nebraska to move the football. Because if you have to have like the Nebraska scoring drive, their lone touchdown drive, 13 plays, 75 yards. That's
what it's been like all year.
All year, man. Yeah. That's a lot of plays. That is a ton of plays because that is 13 chances to make a mistake, to turn the ball over, to get a hold. Meanwhile, look at the touchdown plays for Indiana. 8 plays, 6 plays, 10 plays, 4 plays, 3 plays, 4 plays, 4 plays. They were moving down the field so quickly. And so, I mean, Rule's been talking about it, dude, going back to the offseason of like, I want the runs to turn into 80-yard runs or the pass to turn into a 40-yard pass. And it's like, yeah, we all do, but they don't have either the players or the scheme. It's obviously a combination of both to do it. But man, you think back to that UTEP game and you know how much of it was just that it was UTEP, but you look back at that versus today, it's an entirely different offense. That offense was exciting. It was like, wow, look at all of the possibilities that they have at their disposal. And now a month and a half later, dude, through 5 games now or 7 games, excuse me. Or maybe it was just the power games, through 5 power games. Yeah, that's what it is. They're averaging fewer yards per play than they did last year through 5 power games. It's like the offense is now, you know, the question coming out of yesterday was, is Nebraska regressing? The offense has now regressed to a point where it's actually on paper worse than it was last year, which I never imagined myself saying that, you know, back on August 31st.
Yeah, and some of that I think you can kind of counter with the other. They played basically 3 good teams this year, or I think 3 good teams. People could dispute it, but
Colorado, Illinois, and
Indiana. They all have good defenses. If you look at what Illinois has done in every game where they haven't played Nebraska was able to throw on them. They didn't have an issue passing on that team.
Yep.
What were they doing in that game that they cannot do right now?
Great question.
Back. That was one of Dylan's best games.
Like, it's his best game of the year.
What was happening in that game that is suddenly just unavailable to you at this point? Part of it to me is, and when Rule talks about, well, their short passes turn into X amount of yards. Yeah, it's because your defensive backs are playing 9-yard cushion because they have the ability to throw a 16-yard back shoulder route that you can't do. They have the ability to do all of it. Like, they can block it, they can run it, they can catch it. They can, Nebraska can't even do. So I'm not finishing my point because I keep having thoughts come into my head as it's happening. What is extremely frustrating to me is Nebraska can't do simple. So it's really, really hard for them to do creative or exotic because they can't even do the stuff that's right in front of them. Yep. They can't line up. They're not good enough as an offensive line, which is incredibly damning for as veteran as that line is. They can't get off the first level of guys to the second level. And because of that, you can't open up long runs. On top of it, your running backs are just missing holes at an alarming rate. None of them are good. No. I don't need to hear about, Dante Dowdell can do this or Emmett Johnson can do that. Or, I would just play Ramir Johnson most of the time. You're limited in what he can do. He's the best of the 3 of them in terms of he's going to hurt you the least, but he's probably got a very, very, low ceiling in regards to what that looks like too. But Emmett Johnson's just missing holes, just completely missed a blitz pickup yesterday that led to that. Dylan, honestly, I'm not the biggest broadcast guy in the world. When the games are going on, it's easy for me to tune it out. I don't pay attention to what they're saying. One of the few times where I've been like, it's good to sit here and listen to someone go through this. They're explaining that second interception and basically why Dylan had no opportunity on that play. Emmett Johnson just never picked up the blitz. He ran his route right away. Nobody had called out the blitz. You have a broken play. They can't do simple. And if you can't do simple, I don't know how it's going to get a lot better. And I asked this to Marcus Satterfield before the Rutgers game. how are you supposed to have a run game when the quarterback isn't a threat and you line up in the shotgun and you can't block and you can't get to the second level? And so you already have 11 versus 10 because you're never worried about the quarterback. I mean, they've got a lot of things to figure out. And they just went past a bye week and figured out none of it.
See, and that is how much of that is like the scary part of everything. It's like it's one thing to lose 56-7. It's another thing to lose 56-7 in the 7th game. It's another thing to lose 56-7 coming out of an off week, looking as poor as you have looked all year. The offense has gotten worse now for a month, but it's scary because like I know that I am a believer in Indiana. I think that they're a really good football team. I believe that their offense is capable of what their offense did yesterday. Their defense, I've watched them. Their defense is not this good. And so to me, that says, oh no, that means Nebraska's offense is this bad. And I actually think that if you're going to give credit or blame, I think it's more towards I'm concerned about Nebraska's offense way more than I want to say Indiana's defense. It's why we've been talking for 20 minutes and we've barely talked about Nebraska's defense, who was horrible yesterday. But oddly, I think the much, much bigger concern for the rest of the season is what we saw from Nebraska's offense, because the margin of error is going to be so small, just like it was last year, where I think that they're going to win a 6th game. I think that they are going to go to a bowl game, but it is going to take a variety of factors, kind of like it did last year, where the defense is just magnificent and the offense does slightly more than enough to get them a victory. Whether it's against UCLA or I guess USC or Wisconsin or Iowa. Like, I don't know if I'd power rank the most likely win. Like, I would start with UCLA. I don't know who I would go with second, just because the other teams have looked better and worse depending on the week. But that's where my concern lies coming out of it. It's so difficult to move the ball. It's so difficult to finish drives. And that's not even taking into account that the team still can't kick field goals. And, that we didn't talk about that yesterday because they never attempted one. But like, that is also the thing that is going to hang over every single game, basically once you get past Ohio State.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. My big takeaway from yesterday was more on the offense than it was the defense. Do you think I want to kind of get into a little of what Matt Rule said in his opening statement about that he was as surprised as anybody by what he saw. Is it possible? Is it at all possible that this was a Shane Falco, the replacements quicksand game? Nebraska just got punched immediately and they're nowhere near as bad as they played, and that they could show up and not go out and beat Ohio State, but that they could play better next week against Ohio State and rebound from this performance against Indiana? Like, how much stock would you put into that idea?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because I was thinking of that exact same question this morning when I was looking at the line to see what it was, and it's 23.5. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting, because they lost by 49 to a team that collectively people would view as certainly less talented than Ohio State and worse than Ohio State. If they blind up tomorrow, I know a lot of people would pick Ohio State to win the game versus Indiana. And so I was like, is that just a sucker bet then to take Ohio State minus the points? Because my initial inclination is, of course I'm going to take Ohio State. Why would I take Nebraska? Things did snowball incredibly fast. I guess I would wonder in this game, what is the defense doing? Because I feel like they are trending in a way where, against the two best offenses they played in the Big Ten, they have looked their worst. And, Illinois had them on skates, especially in the second half. Indiana, oh my gosh. And the best defensive performance when you take into consideration the opponent this year is Colorado. But that's so far back in time now that I don't really know what we can do with that. Ohio State, I've watched a lot of Ohio State this year. I'm not a huge Will Howard guy, but he has mobility. But the big issue with them is they can run, and then they have the best receivers in college football on the same team. They have two of the top 5, 4, 3 wide receivers in college football, in Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith, and one of them is a true freshman. So that's going to be really difficult. I continue to just be, when I think of where was I wrong about the team this year, I guess in the end, the offense really shouldn't surprise me that much, just because I was never a big Marcus Satterfield guy. I cannot believe that this defensive line has looked like this in these big games where they can't get any pressure, they can't get any push. Rourke, I know he bangs up his thumb, and it sounds like he's going to be out for their next game versus Washington. But otherwise, they get the one sack on the blitz on 4th down. Clean jersey all day long, and if they can't get pressure, it changes like the equation of everything. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't know, but I imagine I'm going to pick Ohio State to win comfortably. Coming into the weekend, I was kind of leaning a score similar to what they did to Iowa. They beat Iowa 35-7. I'm probably around that number, but it wouldn't surprise me if we're talking about Nebraska getting shut out in this game because Ohio State's coming off of a loss and they're coming off of an off week. And, we just went through 25 minutes of why we're concerned about Nebraska's offense. I think it's going to be real tough sledding.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a difficult game. I don't think Nebraska is going to be in it for very long. I would be a little surprised if they lose worse than they did to Indiana.
I would too.
I'd be surprised if they get shut out. I think it's really hard in college football to get shut out. Nebraska hasn't had it happen a lot. Like even their
they haven't been shut out since 1996, right? Like that's yeah.
Well, even the Chubba Purdy on the road against Michigan and
they scored
2021 and
22.
Or 22. Who knows what year is what? Who cares really? But yeah, they managed to get 3 points out of that. So
yeah.
I'd be a little surprised if they got completely shut out. With the defense, the defensive line, I bought hook, line, and sinker that they had figured some things out, that Jamari Butler was healthy, that Ty Robinson was playing his best football, that they were going to be ready to go, and they just got blown out. And not just, the score of the game. They got blown off the line of scrimmage by Indiana by an offensive line that I didn't think was that good to begin with. I mean, like Rutgers had a better offensive line if you want to go by PFF grades or just expectations for the NFL or whatever it is.
No.
Trying to think, Illinois' offensive line I expected was better than Indiana's. Indiana's offensive line totally took Nebraska out of that game. I mean, on that 3rd and 1, you have the center basically took out John Bullock and another player on one block, just a complete and utter demolition that we haven't seen from a Nebraska offensive lineman at the 2nd or 3rd level at all this year. Just opening up that hole where you need Deshaun Singleton to fill it, and he missed and actually ended up taking out Nash Hutmaker, which likely caused some of Nebraska's issues going forward. But yeah, the defensive line, not good. The tackling on the 2nd and 3rd level, as bad as maybe it's ever been. It's easier for me to look at that defensive performance and be like, all right, terrible game, terrible circumstance, snowballs on itself. I think Nebraska can bounce back, and I actually think they can bounce back and be okay. Not good, certainly not dominant against Ohio State, but I think they could be okay. Like, I think if they had an actual offense to complement them, they could keep that game well within that margin, and lose maybe by 3 scores, but it's closer to 17 than it is 24. At this point, I think that defense can hang around, but ultimately that dam is going to break. And the best thing Nebraska's offense has going forward is its ability to stay on the field with its slow plotting drives, which at least eliminates the amount of time a team would have. But it's going to be hard to trust this defense again when we come out of these 2 games. Now, you don't face an offense like this. Everybody else is very one-dimensional. But still, I mean, this is a veteran group. This is a group that was supposed to be able to kind of, get you to next year where you have to reassemble your defense and it's not going to look this good. And they failed. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. They have failed. And the idea of being built through your defense and losing 56-7, even Iowa's worst losses, like they lost to Ohio State 35-7.
Yep.
And Ohio State had to grind out that 35.
Yep.
I don't know if that's what it's going to look like next weekend. And Nebraska just can't seem to get past the we're here. Well, no, you're not. You're just because you're poking your head through the door frame doesn't mean that you open the door and walk through. Yeah. That's just kind of what it feels like right now.
Yeah, and so now it feels like, a season, pending on wins and losses that we will leave, and we will have to ask the question of was progress made in 2024 going into 2025? I think the defense is worse. The last 2 seasons now, 19 games into the Matt Rule era, they have had their struggles against, the elite offenses, right? In Colorado last year wasn't an elite offense, but they were a good offense, and they took Nebraska to lunch.
It was 13-7 in the third quarter of that game.
For
I
sure,
mean, that one's just a throwaway to me.
Yeah. And obviously we know what Michigan did, but Michigan won the national championship. So what are you to do with that? And so this year I've been, in terms of expectations versus reality, much more disappointed in the defense. We already spent enough time on the offense, but again, they look worse now in some ways, which I can't believe I'm saying given how much I bought into the wide receivers and certainly the quarterback. Special teams is a tire fire. And so barring a surprise in these last 5 games, I think that, what's the best case now? 7-5? Or is it just 6-6? What would you say is a true best case scenario, over the course of these 5 games? Because 7-5 would be progress. I will say that is progress, even if it wouldn't feel that way, given they started 5-1. But man, 6-6, as much as people would be like, thank God they got to a bowl game, I do know that it's yeah, but was that true progress that we were, all hoping for or expecting?
Yeah, I think 8-4 is still possible, and this is my argument for it.
Yeah.
And we're now 30-some minutes into the podcast. Go back to your thought process on what Wisconsin was 4 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Wisconsin was dead in the water. They were one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. Now Wisconsin, having beaten up Purdue, Rutgers, Northwestern, they have their backup quarterback in. Phil Longo is finally calling an offense that fits with what they're doing. Now Wisconsin's the boogeyman. This is what college football is. We spend so much time on the individual 1-2 week stretches, and then we want to make it seem like that's going to be what happens throughout the rest of the weeks and the rest of the season. We did this last year. I mean, they were 5-3, and they needed one win in those final 4 games, and it was supposed to be Michigan State, and then they had Maryland, and they didn't do it. And so I can easily see where people are going to be concerned about that happening again because it's already happened once. But also, at one point, Rutgers was undefeated, and they were supposed to be a scary team, and now they've lost 3 straight games. UCLA is suddenly better than what they look like. I guess what I'm saying is there's ebbs and flows in the entirety of the season, and there's going to be the peaks and valleys that come along with that. And so my caution is, before we get into is 6-6 a good enough year, I think we have to let things play out. And I know that's really an annoying take to have, especially in what is a pseudo
post-game after a 49-point loss.
Right. But Iowa just lost to Michigan State. They haven't looked good in multiple games this year, and then they have looked great in other games. Illinois is a team that Nebraska should have beat, and they had a really nice win against Michigan last night. And they're probably going to end up finishing 9-3 on the season. But
yeah.
We can't look at week-to-week results and just assume that it means anything and transpose it to the next game, because it's not playing out like that in this mega conference. And we're seeing that not just in the Big Ten. Go look at the SEC. I mean, Mississippi State is hanging in these games. Vanderbilt is hanging in these games. South Carolina should have beat Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia. Georgia beat Texas. None of it. Every week is a totally different week. And I think it's really hard to look more than a couple weeks into the future. I feel very confident, and I'm sure you do too, Nebraska will lose to Ohio State next week.
Very much so.
I feel very confident on that one. I would really struggle to, if you're like Mike, do you think it's more likely they go 3-2 or 1-4 over the next 5 games? I think 1-4 is a safer bet because you're coming off of a 49-point loss. Yet there was a reason that I thought they could be a 9-win team this year. There's a reason that I thought they could be a 9-win team going into the Indiana game. So I don't want to let one result overshadow everything else. And I don't want to do what I think happens so often, is that we narrow our focus only to what's happening with Nebraska and forget that teams change throughout the course of a season, and then that can happen to Nebraska too. Just because this could be the low point doesn't mean that they have to stay there. That would be my optimistic view of coming out of a 49-point, 2 week to prepare for it. You look like you've never played football before. That's the best that I can do for you. Doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen, but I think that you at least have to keep the mentality available to you that this doesn't have to be where the season craters and falls off a cliff. It can just be the low point where you look back at it and you're like, man, what a horrendous performance.
Thank God they rebounded from that one.
But then, I don't want to write off chunks of the season, and I don't want to make UCLA, Wisconsin, USC, who just lost to Maryland, and I learned about it hours after the game because I had stopped watching when Maryland didn't convert on the 4th down play earlier in the final 2.5 minutes of the game. And then Iowa, who lost to Michigan State last night. I don't want to build these teams up as if they're unbeatable, and I don't want to act like Nebraska should beat them. What they have is a series of 50-50 games, and they should come out ahead at some point. Now, will they? That's up to them. But I don't think it's as unnavigable as some are going to make it coming out of this.
Yeah.
Because it feels really, really bad right now, but it doesn't mean that it has to stay there.
So you bring up great points. I think I do disagree with you ultimately. Like, I don't think 8-4 is on the table, mainly because if we agree that Ohio State is a loss, like imagining them going 3-1 is really difficult for me to do at this point in time. I think the other thing I would say is, like, you're right. Like, we are discussing today one game. We're discussing the Indiana game. But if you look now at the last 4, they're 2-2. They looked really bad for a half versus Purdue in terms of their offense being unable to get out of its way. I know the weather was strange, but they also had a really, really bad half on offense versus Rutgers. I guess ultimately, if you are going to be right, or if the answer is somewhere in the middle, I think the defense is again going to have to carry the day.
Right.
And
that's the idea.
Yeah. And the best part for them is outside of Ohio State. You said it earlier. Like, we're not going to look ahead at all these Nebraska games and talk about a bunch of, stellar offenses. USC has a whole host of issues. I am very much a believer in this time zone stuff in terms of traveling across the country and what that will do. So it's like a bummer that is happening. But in the end, hey, at least UCLA is going to have to do the same thing. And hey, when that TV time, if it comes out tomorrow, that would not shock me if that was an 11 a.m. Big Ten Network special. And you get them at a 9 a.m. body clock game. Iowa's offense is what it is. And you're right. They certainly didn't look like a great team last night versus Michigan State. And spot on about Wisconsin too. A month ago, we were like, wow, this team sucks. A month later, we're like, wow, that game is going to be really difficult. I tend to think the game is going to be difficult. Same with Iowa. Same with all these games, mainly because
I think they're all going to be difficult.
They usually are, right? Yeah. And so you hit it at the very end, though. It's going to be a 50-50 game. And when you said that, it's like, I know what happens in those games. So if Nebraska's going to prove you more right, or if maybe they're going to find themselves somewhere in the middle. They won't be 3-2. They won't be 1-4. Maybe they can get to 2-3. That gets you to 7 wins. And it's your best season in 8 years. But they're going to have to close out a game or two in these final 5 if they're going to have a chance to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't argue anything that you said there. I'm just saying I'm not taking that off the table. I wouldn't predict that they're going to go 8-4. But I would be surprised. We'll put it this way. I think it's more likely that they win multiple of their last 5 games than winning 1 or none.
Yeah.
We'll put it that way. And so maybe that's 7-5. And I said before the year, I don't think 7-5 is good enough. I'll say it right now. I don't think 7-5 is good enough. I don't think what Nebraska's doing right now or how they've looked these last couple of weeks is good enough. But I also don't want to completely write off nearly half of the season because of what it looked like on Saturday. That is sort of the line that I at least am drawing for myself. Other people, they might be putting together their hot boards. They might be asking, can Nebraska come up with $56 million? Whatever it is. I don't think that's a real conversation. So that's where I'm at with it. But people are going to do what they want. And frankly, It's college football, so who the hell knows? So, but again, I am dumbfounded at the just how bad it looked off of 2 weeks to prepare. Like it's really hard
Yep.
to sit here and say that you believe in what Matt Rule is doing in terms of a vision and you believe in the people that are around him. I believe in Matt Rule. I don't know that I believe in a lot of this coaching staff right now because I think offensively you're getting shown up, and not just the play calling. I think a lot of the position coaches have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
And then you couldn't have a more glaring concern than special teams right now.
Yep.
I mean, you had 2 weeks to find somebody who can snap a ball to the punter. First of all, you let somebody run free who should have blocked it anyways. Second of all, your punter had to scoop the snap off the ground on your first punt. You have the ball at the 2-yard line to start your first drive of the game.
Unreal.
Later in the game, you're fumbling kickoff returns. You're still not getting to the 25, so you're risking it and not even coming close.
Yep.
But doing dumb things repeatedly has nothing to do with we're going to try to figure out the personnel. It's baked into the DNA of what you're doing, your coaching, how you're practicing. They have to get that out. They have to figure out how to get that out. The football IQ needs to be a lot better at Nebraska than it has been. And it starts with the guys on the sidelines because it's not getting done there. So it's not being baked into what Nebraska's doing as a team when they're on the field.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Moving forward now, I wonder, depending on how this season finishes, the discussion that will be had about coordinators, about position coaches. I think that everything should be on the table. We've been watching and rooting and covering this team, whatever version of our lives we're in now for going 30 years now. We have seen many coaches, struggle to make the necessary moves early on in their tenures, and it shapes the perception of them. And, I'm with you. I think talking about a buyout number of $56 million is stupid. I do not think it's stupid, though, to talk about coordinators and position coaches. And if you want to, continue having that goodwill, and if you want, in my opinion, it's just like, if you want to make good decisions that are setting your program up to succeed, those are the discussions that are going to have to be had. Which, certainly the special teams conversation has been there all year long. But, when we see Nebraska's offense, have its lunch eaten like this over and over and over, I think that there needs to be a very real conversation, whether it's coordinator or position coaches too.
Well, and a big part of that conversation is what is it that you're trying to do? Because we've heard since you've been here, you want to be a team that runs the football. They can't run the football. They don't commit to running the football. They don't commit to running the football because they can't run the football. So,
yeah.
All right. If you're going to be a passing team, you got to have more concepts or you've got to have better wide receivers.
Yep.
And if you're going to be a passing team and you want to be a quick strike team, you've got to be better on the edge and block. Like it's just, there's all of these different things. So you have to find the lane that you want to be, and then you have to actually emphasize and be better in those ways. And it's not just getting personnel. It's not just getting the right position coach, but it can be made easier if you know what it is that you're going to go be, and then you go do that. And I had pushed back on the sort of identity conversation with Nebraska's offense because I thought they sort of knew who they were through the first 4 games of the season. Through the next 3, it is very apparent that they do not. That there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. So we'll see what Nebraska's actually able to pull together. Is there anything else you'd like to get to? Is there any moment in that game that you would want to discuss? Is there a singular play that you would like to break down? Would you like to get the grease board out and draw up anything for us?
No, just motion, more moving. Go back and forth. No, I think
I would like to see Corey Barney start on one side and end up on the other side before the ball is snapped.
That's
but it's
what
like
I
told you, I could see Nebraska doing the Tony thing where you line up offsides in a critical moment where you have 2 guys that just collide with each other.
The ball is snapped off the guy who's going in motion, like last year versus Colorado.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe it's for the best that their offense is static. At least you're eliminating that potential issue.
I'd like to see him under center more. If I could do one change, I would rather see them under center because then it creates the illusion that if you play fake there, first of all, the play fakes are bad. Like, you have to actually get the ball near the running back for people to think that you're going to potentially give it to him. But then it also helps set up your running game a little bit better, because you're not just snapping it back where everybody knows that if he's turning, it's not like he's going to keep it. And they have yet to successfully run an RPO this year. They look like they tried a couple times on Saturday, and it wasn't good. I have one more thing I want to ask you about. And it's hard to divorce this from everything else on the offense. Where are you at with Dylan Raiola right now, coming off of 2 shaky games in a row?
Yeah, I think that he's looking. I think he hasn't looked very good. I think, man, I really hate discussing like the body language stuff, because it got tired for me a couple weeks ago when everyone was doing it. I think that he's played a little laissez-faire, though, I guess is how I would describe it. He doesn't look as crisp as a quarterback. Now, how much of that is what he is getting from others around him? Is he not responding as well to what is happening, where like everything's kind of falling apart, and so it puts more pressure on him, but he's not able to overcome that. And so I think it's starting to get to him. I've definitely been disappointed by his play. Going back to that Illinois game, man, it was like, wow, okay, if the defense is going to struggle this year, at least the offense is going to be able to move the ball, and they have not. So I think he's looked worse. I'm very curious to see how he responds. Like, it's crazy to think that his touchdown interception ratio was like this thing that we were holding up all year, and now it's pretty much disappeared over the last couple of weeks, because he doesn't have
some of it his fault, some of it not his fault.
100%. So I definitely think that he has not looked like the player that he did for the first 4 games. And can they recapture any of that? But that goes back to the 20-minute conversation we had earlier on the offense. I just don't know if there are any quick fixes right now.
I don't know that there are either. We will see what they have in store for Ohio State on Saturday. Big noon kickoff once again, I believe.
Big noon kickoff once again.
Someone was telling me Nebraska hasn't won a big noon kickoff game in big noon kickoff history.
Yeah, Gus Johnson has never called a Nebraska win. If I believe they're now 0-10 when he is on the call.
That is an incredible, meaningless statistic, but incredible nonetheless.
Yeah,
because that encompasses a lot of football,
a lot of games,
a lot of bad losses in there.
A lot of bad loss. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's not even a whole lot of good ones in there. It's mostly horrible.
Yeah, mostly horrible. That'll be the subtitle for this Sunday side session.
Oh, Lord.
Indiana. Mostly horrible.
Right.
Yep. Josh, is there anything you would like to plug? Anything to try to get the people? How can they listen to you daily? Where can they listen?
Hey, you know what? If you like my voice, you said, wow, 47 minutes and 53 seconds. This was great. I would love to hear more of you. This is awesome because I talk into a microphone all the time. My radio show, as Schaefer said, is on Sportsmanlike Conduct, 1620 The Zone. We are on from 2 to 6. John Bishop and myself, with Nick Grimm as the producer, Monday through Friday. But don't worry, I also host other podcasts. If you like running, I do one called Chasing 3 Hours. There's a Chicago Marathon sign behind me right now from the recent marathon.
Are you offended? Are you offended that Chasing 3 and Chasing 3 Hours are a little bit close together? That Chasing 3 has been sort of a disaster? Yes. Whereas Chasing 3 Hours has, I think, gone well.
Yeah, 70 plus episodes now. Just did a recap of Chicago. So if you like running,
now their production for Chasing 3 with the videos are slightly better than what you're
little better than mine. So I got that on Friday mornings. 4 a.m. is when those episodes drop. And then along with Jack Mitchell, who I know is a friend of Husker 24/7, we host the I-80 Club. You can subscribe on YouTube to the I-80 Club or on Patreon if you want more content. Right now, in season, Schaefer, we have been promising 3 episodes. We do a Wednesday night pod live, a Saturday morning pod live, and a Saturday night reaction pod. But with basketball season almost here, we will be doing post-game shows for select games. And
you will be doing post-game basketball
Definitely shows? Not. Definitely not. And then Jack will be doing a Friday morning, we're calling it the Friday brunch show, and he'll be doing Nebraska basketball talk every Friday. So we'll be doing, I don't know, like 5 or 6 episodes a week. And you and I do stuff sometimes, including tomorrow when we'll talk about the National Football League following Week 7 action, including the big game today for your Vikings. So, yeah, again, if you like my voice, more power to you. My voice is on the airwaves or on the internet all the time. So please go subscribe and help me pay my bills.
Yeah. Help Josh pay his bills.
I want to buy a house someday.
Well, we would like to see that happen for you too. Here at Husker 24/7, we believe in housing for all.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of Husker 24/7, plenty of content from yesterday's game, even though not many players came and spoke. We're getting into that territory. Nebraska loses by a lot of points, and suddenly no one's talking. Never a great sign for the health of the program or where things are at in the season. We'll see how they handle things going this week. Nebraska plays Ohio State. We'll have a lot of coverage leading up to that. Recruiting is still happening. Nebraska's working on some flips. Would just throw that out there. Check back with the website every once in a while. You might be like, oh wow, they picked up a new player. It might happen. I'm telling you, Nebraska's working on it. I don't know that a 49-point loss is the best route to that, but I think they're still going to be adding some players to this 2025 class and beyond. So be sure to check out our coverage of recruiting at Husker247.com. Of course, if you are listening to this, you know all about our podcast. You know about our YouTube page. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, please subscribe. We appreciate you there as well. We'll be back with more Husker 24/7 content throughout the week. Catch you next time.